You are walking through a city. It could be any city: London, New York, Mumbai, Rome, and they are everywhere. On the ledges, on the benches, on the sidewalk right in front of you. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pecking at crumbs, waddling around your feet, completely unbothered. You probably step around them without even thinking. You have done it your whole life. But here is the thing nobody ever stops to say out loud. You are surrounded by meat, hundreds of pounds of it, free, wandering around in broad daylight, and almost nobody eats it. Not a single food stall, not a single restaurant on that block. Not your neighbor, not you, an entire city, packed with protein, and we all just walk past it every single day. Most people have a quick answer for that. They say pigeons are dirty, they say they eat garbage, they say they carry disease, and that sounds reasonable. That sounds like a clean, logical explanation, but it is not the real reason. The real reason has almost nothing to do with the pigeon. It has everything to do with your brain. And once you understand what is actually happening inside your head when you look at a pigeon, you will never be able to think about your own choices the same way again. Stay until the end, because the last part is the one that will genuinely change how you see yourself. Here is what almost no one knows. For most of human history, the pigeon was not a pest. It was a prize. We are talking about ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, medieval Europe, the Ottoman Empire. Across thousands of years and dozens of civilizations, the pigeon was one of the most valued food animals on the planet. Roman emperors ate them at banquets. Egyptian pharaohs kept enormous flocks. In medieval England and France, only the wealthy were legally allowed to own a pigeon loft. It was called a dovecote. And in some parts of Europe, the right to keep pigeons was written directly into law as a privilege of the nobility. Peasants were not allowed to touch them. Eating pigeon was not poverty food. It was aristocratic food, the young birds especially, called squab. Squab was tender, it was rich, it was flavorful in a way that most other birds simply were not. Kings ate it, queens ate it, popes ate it. It was the kind of food that signaled power and status at the table, and pigeons were perfect for farming. They required almost no effort. They flew out and found their own food. They came back. They bred fast. One historian described the medieval dovecote as essentially a self-replenishing food machine that required zero input from its owner. Around 10,000 years ago, humans first domesticated the rock dove. That is the scientific name for what we now call the city pigeon. They were tamed, bred, and kept in settlements across the Middle East and North Africa. They served two purposes: food and messages. The homing ability of pigeons is extraordinary. Release one 500 miles from home and it will find its way back. Julius Caesar used them on the battlefield. So did Genghis Khan. So did the Allied forces in World War I, where a pigeon named Cher Ami saved nearly 200 soldiers by delivering a message through active fire. Cher Ami was shot through the chest, lost a leg, was half blinded, still made it. So this was not a throwaway bird. This was a bird that fed civilizations and carried their most critical communications. And then something changed. But here is what is fascinating. The bird did not change. We did. Here is the part of the story most people never hear. The city pigeon is not a wild animal. It is a domestic animal that got loose. When pigeon farming declined in Europe, starting around the 17th and 18th centuries, lofts were abandoned. Flocks escaped. Birds began living wild in the cliffs of buildings, exactly as their ancestors had lived in coastal rock cliffs before humans ever domesticated them. The pigeon adapted perfectly to the city. Because the city, to a pigeon, looks exactly like a cliff face. Ledges are ledges. Windows are caves. Bridges are overhangs. The birds that fill every city square on Earth are not some separate, dirty, urban species. They are your great-great-grandmother's dinner that learned to take care of itself. Genetically, a pigeon roosting on a London bus stop and a squab served at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris are the same animal, the same species, the same bird, different postcode. So when did the shift happen? When did the food become the pest? This is where it gets interesting. In the 19th century, something dramatic changed in European and American diets. Industrial agriculture arrived. Suddenly you could produce chicken, beef, and pork at massive scale, at low cost for everybody. The pigeon lost its economic role almost overnight. It was no longer useful as a food machine because there were better food machines now. At the same time, cities were growing fast. Pigeons were multiplying in those same cities. And they were doing what birds do: roosting on buildings, leaving droppings, making noise. City officials needed a category for them. And the category they chose was vermin. Not food, not resource, not anything useful. Vermin. That single word did something remarkable. It did not just change the law, it changed the brain. Because once a culture officially labels something as vermin, something happens inside the human mind that is almost impossible to undo. It triggers disgust. And disgust, as psychologist Paul Rozin at the University of Pennsylvania spent decades documenting, is the most powerful food blocker that exists in the human brain. Rozin called it the law of contagion. The idea is simple and deeply irrational. Once your brain places something in the category of contaminated or disgusting, even brief contact with that thing makes everything near it feel contaminated too. In one famous experiment, Rozin asked people if they would drink a glass of perfectly clean, sterile juice after a sterilized, brand new cockroach had been briefly dipped in it. Most people refused, even when they knew the cockroach was clean, even when they watched it being sterilized in front of them. The brain did not care about the facts. Once the category of disgusting was activated, logic left the room. And that is exactly what happened to the pigeon. The moment it was reclassified as vermin, the disgust response locked in. It spread through culture, through children watching their parents recoil, through language, through jokes. Within a few generations, the idea of eating a pigeon had moved from completely normal to viscerally repulsive, not because the bird changed, but because the story around it changed. So, what about the actual health argument? Is there something real there? Here is the honest answer. Sort of. But probably not in the way you think. Yes, city pigeons carry some pathogens: salmonella, cryptococcus, psittacosis, but so do chickens. In fact, a study published in the journal Zoonoses and Public Health found that feral urban pigeons carry bacterial loads broadly comparable to commercial poultry. What matters is how the animal is raised and how the meat is handled. A pigeon that has spent its life eating bread crusts and cigarette ends near a rubbish bin is not what you would want on your plate. But that is not a pigeon problem. That is a diet and environment problem. The same logic applies to farmed chickens that eat their own droppings in industrial facilities. We just do not think about that because the disgust alarm has never been wired to the word chicken. It has been wired hard and fast to the word pigeon. Here is another layer. In most cities, catching and eating wild urban pigeons is actually illegal. In the United Kingdom, pigeons are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. In the United States, many cities have ordinances against trapping urban birds. So it is not just a psychological barrier, there is a legal one too. And those laws mostly exist because pigeons were reclassified as pests to be managed, not resources to be used. The policy followed the disgust. The disgust reinforced the policy. A feedback loop that now feels ancient and natural even though it is only about 150 years old. Contrast this with squab farming. It never fully disappeared. In France, squab has been continuously eaten as a delicacy without interruption. In China, pigeon is still a prized dish in Cantonese cuisine. In Egypt, pigeon stuffed with rice and spices is a national dish called hammam. Walk into a high-end restaurant in New York or London today, and you may find squab on the menu at $30 or $40 per plate. The exact same bird, farmed, not urban, but biologically identical to the one walking around outside the restaurant's front door. The price of the plate and the disgust of the street are separated by nothing except a story your culture told you before you were old enough to question it. And here is the most unsettling part. This is not just about pigeons. This is about how your entire sense of what is safe, what is acceptable, and what is real is constructed. You did not decide through careful rational analysis that pigeons are disgusting. You were taught. Your brain received the category and filed it without ever inspecting it. And once filed, that category became felt like truth, like instinct, like something primal that you were born with. But you were not born with it. You were born knowing nothing about pigeons at all. Psychologists who study food disgust have found that almost all of our disgust responses are culturally installed between the ages of 2 and 7. Your parents' flinches, the words adults used, the images you absorbed. None of it was conscious, none of it was a decision. And yet it now controls what you will and will not put in your mouth without you ever noticing that something is controlling you. Think about that. Not just with pigeons, with everything. What else in your life has been filed as dangerous or disgusting or unacceptable based on a category you received rather than a conclusion you reached? What else are you walking past every day because a long-dead bureaucrat decided to call it vermin? The history of what humans eat is not a history of logic. It is a history of categories. Categories created by kings and priests and politicians and economies. Filed into children, passed down as feeling. We are not eating pigeons in our cities for the same reason we are not doing 1,000 other things that we could theoretically do. Not because they are actually dangerous, but because the story around them is. You pass those birds every morning. Your brain registers them as wrong, as other, as not for you. And you keep walking. And maybe that instinct is protecting you, or maybe you are just obeying a rule written 150 years ago by someone who needed the birds to have a category, and you never once asked who wrote it. The pigeon did not change. The category did. And the category lives inside you, feeling like yours, but it was never yours at all.